Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Assembly meeting of April 23rd, and I'd like to welcome everyone in the audience and those that are home watching on TV or the Internet. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Madam Clerk, please do the roll call.
Ms. Domboski.
Present.
Mr. Croft.
Here.
Mr. Evans.
Here.
Mr. Flynn.
Present.
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Honored to be here.
Mr. Cheney.
Present.
Mr. Steele. Requested to be excused. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Starr. Requested to be excused. Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I'd like to ask Sarah Tolley to come to the podium and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Sarah Tolley? Tolley? Am I pronouncing that wrong?
The chief's daughter.
Oh, you started there.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
No one's safe at this meeting.
Mr. Trainee, can I get a motion to approve item 4A and 4B?
Madam Clerk, move to approve item 4A, minutes of the regular Assembly meeting of July 12th, and item 4B, minutes of the regular meeting of July 26th. That's one motion to move both of them, Madam Chair,
Second.
for approval.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar, second. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any objections? Hearing and seeing none, those minutes are approved. Mr. Mayor.
Nothing at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Assembly Chair's report. I also have the privilege of serving as the Budget and Finance Committee Chair, and I have a report. The committee met on Thursday, August 18th. The committee is now a committee of the whole, and there were 6 members in attendance at that meeting. The OMB director provided the following information. The municipality is 58.2% through the year, with 56% of the budget already expended. Departments are managing their budgets well. The schedule for the 2017 budget calendar is finalized. Departments have requested to save 0.5% of the 2016 appropriations. An additional Assembly meeting has been scheduled with concurrence by the Chair for October 25th for the sole purpose of holding the required second public hearing. The municipality's treasurer reported as of August 18, revenues are projected to be $3 million under budget based on the following information. The PFD garnishments due to the state's reduction in the PFD amount. Marijuana tax is projected to have only 2 months collected revenue, and development services reduction in revenue. The committee also received a report on SAP as follows. There are concerns with data conversion. The municipality is hiring developers to perform training. The budget to actuals is under by $600,000. The project will pause between Thanksgiving and Christmas, which leads to an adjustment in the timelines. But even still, May 5th, 2017 is the new projected completion date. The project is ahead of schedule in many areas. The committee also discussed whether or not to continue the independent SAV contract with Zico Consulting. That's the contract that the Assembly has. Although the Budget and Finance Committee, again, is a committee of the whole, there were 6 members in attendance. Mr. Domboski moved that the contract be extended for 3 months. Mr. Trainee second, and the committee members present unanimously recommended that the contract be extended for 3 months at a cost of $8,000 per month. Our next meeting will be September 15 from 12 to 1 in the Assembly conference room. We are now down to committee reports, and I'd like to start with Ms. Domboski.
No report.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Croft.
No committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was able to attend on behalf of the Assembly last week the Alaska Municipal League meeting up in Wasilla. It was an interesting meeting. It's the first one I attended. Had a great presentation there on the whole PERS-TERS issue and the possible repercussions of what may go on in June of next year to municipalities, and that it was pretty sobering. I spoke also with the municipal clerk at the meeting, and we discussed the possibility of having them bring that same presentation to us at a work session when they are in town. It was a representative from Ketchikan and one from Juneau that presented it. I thought it was very valuable, and I know everybody knows the general parameters of it, but it was a pretty specific and helpful presentation. We also received an update from Cynthia Franklin on how the state's marijuana process is going. It was also helpful seeing our process and how it's sort of dovetailing with what's going on down there. The governor spoke to us and said he needed the municipality's help, not surprising. And we also had a great presentation on the PFD initiative that we passed a resolution on here a while ago. Our very own Forrest Dunbar was one of the presenters, and got the Municipal League excited about that proposal. There was also a homeless committee meeting on August 17th. At that meeting, we discussed the outreach to the community, which is going to be basically the count of homeless people in the area, which is sort of the basis for our receiving federal funds. It's very important that we do our best to try to get an accurate count of exactly how many homeless people are in the town, and that's going to be on August 31st. We also heard an update from the various community providers, Brother Francis Shelter, Beans Cafe, the Rescue Mission, and others, regarding the overcrowding conditions that are occurring this summer. They are still occurring according to the reports, diminishing somewhat, but they're finding ways to manage, is the report we received. Also, we had an update from the homeless coordinator on the status of the housing vouchers that are working their way slowly through the system that will help with that overcrowding once they finally hit the streets. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Flynn.
And that's Policy Committee, Thursday, 1:30 p.m., City Hall, 8th floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chair, nothing for committee report, but I do want to ask for an executive session on something that came in front of the Assembly in 2009. It was by a device called either Kingfish or Stingray. It depends on how it's phrased. It gives the police department with a warrant the ability to intercept phone calls and text messages. And Mike Gutierrez had a real question when that came in front of the Assembly. You and I listened to the transcript. So I'd like to have an executive session of the body. I want to know the cost. I want to know the policy procedures for using it. I want to know how many times it's been utilized. And I'm sure we'd only do it with a warrant, but I feel a lot more comfortable if that's addressed by this Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I'll have the clerk schedule an executive session in the future. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Ethics and Elections Committee will be meeting tomorrow at City Hall in room 240 at noon. We will be getting a report about the potential conflict of interest that Mr. Flynn might have with dealing with marijuana licenses. We'll also be getting an update on the progress of our vote by mail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dunbar.
Nothing to report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you. The Community and Economic Development Committee is a very busy committee. We are looking at a variety of things, secondary egress for new subdivisions. We looked at the cell tower Kincaid that we'll be talking about today. We moved that forward with no recommendation. A handful of proposed changes to Title 21. And on August 18th, we met to look at 3 marijuana applications. One is Danish Gardens, which is before us today, and we recommended approval with addition of a signed condition and conditions from staff. We also looked at 2 testing facilities. One is CanTest, and we recommended approval with the addition of a signed condition. And we looked at Alaska Green Labs, which we moved forward without a recommendation because of some concerns with waste disposal, proximity to Cigar Club, and we want to verify that there's not a private residence there. Not to say that their application is inadequate. We just were uncertain at the time. We will look at those at a work session on September 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Domboski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, just for a moment, I'd like to go back and discuss for a second Mr. Trainee's request for an executive session on the potential, I forget the name of it. What was the name of it, Mr. Trainee?
Kingfish Stingray is various names.
Right. And the reason I bring this up, and I think before leadership goes straight into an executive session, I believe that there's some information that we should know, because once we go into an executive session, Assembly members aren't allowed to discuss what's in an executive session. So if in fact we do find out this was purchased without assembly authorization, or if in fact it's being used in a manner without a warrant, I think assembly members should have the full ability to discuss those issues in public. And so if we go to an executive session and we find out some of this information, which I understand can be very delicate, obviously, we don't want to, if APD is using something in a lawful legal manner and it was acquired legally, I think that's a tool that they can use, and I think to be able to not tip their hand into every single thing they do is fine, but if in fact we find out that the police department is using a device to infringe on people's privacy without a warrant, I think those are things that we should not restrict ourselves. So maybe there's a way, maybe if we find that out, we can basically say, this is open now. I don't know what the rules are, and Ms. Tucker's not here, but I think that's something Assembly Council should consider before we go straight to an executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Traney.
Madam Chair, this was approved by the Assembly in 2009. It was brought forward to this body by Rob Hume, Chief of Police at that time. And I remember Mr. Starr said it would allow us to find children that are lost easier. Beyond that, there was no real discussion of the Anchorage Assembly relative to how it was to be utilized. So that's the reason I'm asking for executive session.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. And Mr. Bosky, if I may, if it's determined that we should have this conversation publicly, we will certainly do that. Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Traney. Addendum to the agenda.
Okay, Madam Chair, move to approve the addendum to the agenda and the laid on the table. Sorry. Move to approve the addendum to the agenda and laid on the table items.
Move to incorporate. Thank you,
Incorporate,
Mr.
sorry.
Traney. May I have a second?
Second.
Seeing no objection, that addendum and the laid on table items are incorporated, and I need to read them first. Okay, addendum to the agenda. Item 9F8. AO 2016-106, an ordinance authorizing a second ground lease extension between Municipality of Anchorage and Chugach Senior Center, Inc., an Alaska nonprofit corporation at less than fair market value. And the laid-on-table item, Madam Clerk? Thank you, Mr. Traney. It's item 9F9, an unnumbered ordinance, an ordinance authorizing the withdrawal from Heritage Land Bank inventory and placement into Real Estate Services Inventory Tracts 1 and 2 Yosemite Tract Subdivision Plat 2015-101 in Eagle River and amending the 2016 Heritage Annual Work Program. Mr. Traney, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda as amended, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. May I have a second, please? Second. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Now I'll go to each of you to see if anyone would like to pull any items off the consent agenda before we approve it. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'd pull 9A1 and 9A3.
9A1 and 9A2.
Three.
Three?
Yes.
Three? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Dunbar.
Ma'am, I'll poll item 9 Alpha 2.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No items this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Traney.
Madam Chair, 9F2.
9F2. Thank you, Mr. Traney. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 9 Alpha 4.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Evans.
9 Alpha 5.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Croft.
9 Echo 1 and 13 Alpha.
We're at the consent agenda, Mr.
Okay, just the 9s. That's fine then.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Bosky.
No items.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Now, I have the motion already to approve the consent agenda. Let's vote on the remaining items of the consent agenda. No, I'm good. Thank you, Mr. Traney. Let's vote. The consent agenda is approved, minus the items that we pulled. We are now down to agenda item 9A1, AR 2016-225, a resolution supporting Hunger Action Month and encouraging the elimination of hunger in Anchorage, Alaska. Mr. Weddleton.
Am I reading?
You're going to move to
I'll move
approve.
to approve. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton, I think that you are presenting and someone else is reading.
Lost track.
I'm reading, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Is there Whereas Alaskans' health and well-being is paramount to the bright future of our state, and whereas hunger is a condition of poverty that affects all regions throughout the state of Alaska is dedicated to fighting hunger by providing temporary relief assistance and working with agencies to discover and eliminate barriers to providing food to those most in need. And whereas food insecurity is defined as the inability to procure a sufficient amount of healthy food on a regular basis. Sadly, children comprise over 1/3 of those who do not know where their next meal will come from. And whereas food insecurity can have detrimental effects on an individual's physical and mental health, especially children, hindering development and the ability to live a full and active life. And whereas research suggests that eating quality meals, especially breakfast, increases test scores, decreases school violence, and lowers the rate of obesity. And whereas Alaska's Anti-Hunger Network assists Alaskans in need through voluntary participation of members of the food industry, faith-based, tribal, public, and nonprofit organizations, and private citizens often partnered with state and federal governments. This informal network collects donations, distributes food, and provides relief to thousands of hungry Alaskans every day. And whereas, recognizing the struggle many face each day to put food on the table for their families, Alaskans are encouraged to find out how they can contribute their time, efforts, and resources to ending hunger in their communities. Now, therefore, we, the Anchorage Assembly, the Anchorage Municipal Assembly resolves that September 2016 is recognized as Hunger Action Month. Passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 23rd day of August 2016.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I'm Jim Baldwin. I'm the new Executive Director for the Food Bank of Alaska, and I just want to thank you for issuing this resolution and helping bring attention to food insecurity in our state, in our community, and we have a lot of exciting events planned in the month of September, Hunger Action Month. Two in particular are on September 8th is, remind me the name of the program? Nothing Runs on Empty. And it's a photo exhibit at the boardroom on Thursday, September 8th. I think it's from 4:30 to 8, something like that. And then at the end of the month, my favorite, which is Dine Out Against Hunger. Go to your favorite restaurants, check out our websites for participating restaurants, and when you eat there, the food bank will receive a portion of the proceeds. So thank you very much for your support.
You're welcome, Sarah. And before we go any further, I ask unanimous consent to officially approve this resolution. Seeing no objection, the resolution is officially approved. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you coming here. And the document they read to it talked about children's hunger. And I want to note how good the school district is doing on feeding children. In fact, effective yesterday at the starting of school, we have more schools coming online to feed breakfast to the kids. Because if you don't have a decent breakfast, and many of them don't, you can't learn. Right. So I want to thank your school district for their help in doing this. Other thing is, Chairman and I went to meet with Lisa with Catholic Social Services. We went through their food pantry. If you get a chance, go and look at it, because you're doing a remarkable job feeding people that don't have the food. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Dunbar.
I think the clerk is going to resolve this issue by giving you a bag. I just wanted to thank you for the work you do, and good luck carrying all these canned goods.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And I just want to take a moment to thank Mr. Weddleton, because this was his idea that we bring food, and it was a great idea, and thank you, Mr. Weddleton, for thinking about that. Okay. We are now at agenda item number 9A2, AR 2016-226, a resolution recognizing August 26, 2016 as Women's Equality Day. Mr. Dunbar.
Move to approve.
Second.
Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved. Who's going to read and present?
I will read. And I believe Ms. Demboski is presenting.
Excellent.
Hello, Tiffany. Good to see you again. Oh, and Garen. Great. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing August 26, 2016 as Women's Equality Day. Whereas in 1971, the U.S. Congress designated every August 26 as Women's Equality Day, thus commemorating the 1920 passage of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution granting women the right to vote. And whereas equal participation at the ballot box was the culmination of decades spent organizing, protesting, and advocating for women's rights. And whereas the passage of the 19th Amendment has paved the way for women to participate as volunteers, voters, candidates, and leaders in our democracy. And whereas women have been running for president of the United States since 1872, and on July 26, 2016, the first woman was formally nominated by a major party. And whereas members of the Anchorage Women's Commission are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the Assembly. The commission exists to advise the mayor and the Assembly on matters pertaining to the status of women. And whereas the Anchorage Women's Commission 2016 work plan includes 3 areas of focus: gender wage equality, public safety, and women's health. And whereas the Commission is joined with the YWCA Alaska in efforts to eliminate the gender wage gap in the state of Alaska by 2025. In Alaska, women make an average income of 26 cents for every dollar paid to men, which puts us in the 48th place in the nation for pay equality. And whereas the Commission is partnering with Vision Zero in an initiative which focuses efforts to reduce the loss of life and major injuries on roadways to zero, making communities safer for women, men, and children of Anchorage. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly resolves to join in celebrating Women's Equality Day and recognizing the work of the Anchorage Women's Commission, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 23rd day of August, 2016.
Thank you so much. I'm Tiffany Hall. I'm the chair of the Women's Commission, and I'm here with some of my fellow commissioners. We are so honored to receive this resolution and are really thankful to be here and thankful for the great support of the Assembly and the Mayor. And it's especially suiting that we are here today on August 23rd, as today is Black Women's Equal Pay Day, which means they had to work until today to receive the same wage as their white male counterparts in 2015. So it's a good day for us to remember that we have our work cut out for us. So thanks so much for supporting us, and big thanks to our partners YWCA and the Vision Zero project.
Thank you. We are now at agenda item 9A3, AR 2016-227, recognizing and honoring Lori Skanke for 25 years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Mr. Weddleton.
Move to approve.
Second.
Asking unanimous consent and seeing no objection, that resolution is approved. I'm going to read. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Lori Skanke for her 25 years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Lori Skanke began working for the municipality of Anchorage, MOA, in June 1991. And whereas Lori's career has spanned the administrations of 7 mayors, Tom Finkrich, Meister, George Burch, Mark Begich, Acting Mayor Matt Claman, Dan Sullivan, and Mayor Ethan Berkowitz. And whereas Lori began her MOA career as a landscape architect at MOA Parks and Recreation in June 1991, and was instrumental in the planning and construction of the Camel Creek Trail, Chuck Albrecht Ball Fields, Town Square Park, and many playground safety upgrades. And whereas after 10 years at Parks, Lori moved to project management and engineering as a project manager in 2001, and was instrumental in managing bicycle and pedestrian projects, along with several projects, including the planning and construction of Ship Creek Trail, Keene's Landing, and whereas Lori took on the additional role as the AMET's non-motorized transportation coordinator and played a significant role in working with the public and writing the 2007 MOA pedestrian plan and the 2010 MOA bicycle plan. And whereas Lori has been an advocate for pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, and whereas Lori's loyalty and professionalism are incomparable, and whereas she is an example of what a public servant should be, as shown by her work efforts in assisting directors, managers, supervisors, and employees in advancing the cause for trail, pedestrian, and bicycle planning and construction within the municipality of Anchorage, and in her diligent commitment to our community. And whereas Lori's civil service has been pivotal as a landscape architect, project manager, and non-motorized trail coordinator. And whereas Lori will be retired from her position as of August 31st, 2016. Now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly hereby recognizes and honors Lori Skanke for her devoted service to the municipality of Anchorage and its employees, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 23rd day of August 2016.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman, Assemblyperson Weddleton, the rest of the Assembly, the administration, my boss, and my cheering section here. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. 25 years has gone by very quickly, from playgrounds and parks and trails to sidewalks and bikes. And I've just met a lot of wonderful people along the way, and I'm really going to miss you. So thank you so much. It's been fun for the most part. Oh, Mr. Abbott has left the room. But please tell him, Mr. Mayor, what I mentioned. Anyways, thank you so much for the honor. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Excuse me. I just want to thank Lori. It's been many years we've worked together on bicycle and pedestrian things. I've enjoyed it. We've seen tremendous progress in Anchorage, and everything's got your name on it. So it's been really a great time. And it looks like someone from Bike Anchorage might be here to say hello.
Lindsay, hi.
Thank you for your work. Here, let me give you
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you very much.
One other person, Lori, Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, is that a legalized motorized bicycle creature or under our current code? I hard to tell.
I think it needs a helmet.
Okay, there you go. Lori, you and I go way back prior to my assembly tenure, working on the coastal trail access issue back in the day. So you've been an outstanding advocate for bike and ped folks throughout the community. So thank you for that. Good luck in your retirement. Stick around. I suspect we're going to need you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Mr. Flynn. Lori, I just have a quick comment. I had no idea you were leaving us. None until I saw the resolution. And some pictures on Facebook. But anyway, I just want to thank you and tell you that it's been really wonderful working with you all these years, and you've been so receptive and helpful, and I'm going to miss that, and I wish you well in your endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvie.
You're welcome. Okay, we are... We are now at agenda item 9A4, AR 2016-228, a resolution recognizing and honoring Vicki Gherkin for 27 years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Mr. Flynn.
Move to approve.
Second.
Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved.
Come on up.
Thank you. A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Vicki Gherkin for her 27 years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Vicki Gherkin began working for the municipality of Anchorage in May 1989, Vicki's career has spanned the administrations of 7 mayors, including Tom Fink, Rick Mystrom, George Wirch, Mark Begich, Acting Mayor Matt Clayman, Dan Sullivan, and Mayor Ethan Berkowitz. And whereas Vicki began her MOA career as a senior office assistant with the Parks and Recreation Department in December 1989, and whereas after 13 years at Parks and Rec, Vicki transferred to the Department of Project Management and Engineering as a right-of-way assistant in 2002. And whereas Vicki was promoted within PM&E to Realty Officer position in 2006, Realty Officer 2 in 2009, and Realty Officer 3 in 2012, and whereas Vicki has represented her colleagues as an AMEA secretary, board member, shop steward, and has served on numerous committees, and whereas Vicki has earned the Senior Right-of-Way Professional Designation from the International Right-of-Way Association in 2009, and whereas Vicki has been a subject matter expert for right-of-way acquisition for the municipality, and whereas Vicki has represented the municipality with the International Right-of-Way Association as a board member and served on numerous committees, and whereas Vicki will be retired from her position as of August 31st, 2016, now, therefore, the Anchorage Assembly hereby recognizes and honors Vicki Gherkin for her devoted service to the municipality of Anchorage and its employees, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 23rd day of August 2016.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with the Assembly and all my coworkers over all these years, and I will miss everyone. Thank you.
Hey, Vicki, There's no one in the queue, but I just want to thank you so much for your service and tell you how great it's been working with you through all these years. I can't believe everybody's leaving. You know? Thank you, Vicki. We are now at Agenda Item 9A5, AR 2016-229, a resolution recognizing and honoring Robert Palmer for 23 years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Mr. Evans.
Move to approve.
Second.
Ask unanimous consent. Seeing no objection, this resolution is approved.
A resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly recognizing and honoring Robert Palmer for his 23 years of service with the municipality of Anchorage. Whereas Robert C. Palmer began working for the municipality of Anchorage in June 1993, and whereas Robert's career spanned the administrations of 7 mayors, Tom Fink, Rick Meistrom, George Wirch, Mark Begich, Acting Mayor Matt Clayman, Dan Sullivan, and Ethan Berkowitz, and whereas Robert began his career as a projects administrator at the Watershed Management Division of the Department of Public Works, where he helped develop the municipality's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, permit, and whereas the NPDES program benefited the municipality greatly by ensuring that stormwater discharges remained free of harmful pollutants. The program provided for cost-effective planning, monitoring, reporting, and enforcing of this new regulatory field. And whereas, after the above accomplishments, Robert's career turned to private development in the late 1990s as the oil prices began to rise again. In 1999, Robert began providing the engineering skills to the Private Development Division of Public Works. As private development engineer, Robert reviewed the development of major subdivisions within the Anchorage Bowl. And whereas, during this period, the municipality began increasing its infrastructure development, Robert lent his services and expertise to the Project Management and Engineering Division of Public Works as a project administrator and began managing the design and construction of roads, drainage facilities, and trails. His accomplishments here include many numerous and familiar roads that we all drive on today, such as Pine Street, Spruce Street, Baxter Road, 72nd, 80th, and 84th Avenues, to name a few. And whereas Robert's loyalty and professionalism have served as an example for all, along with his easygoing manner that has always made the seemingly impossible challenges possible. He will be remembered long after he embarks on his new path. And whereas Robert will be retired from the municipality as of August 31st, 2016, now therefore the Anchorage Assembly hereby recognizes and honors Robert Palmer for his devoted service to the municipality of Anchorage and its employees, passed and approved by the Anchorage Assembly this 23rd day of August, 2016.
So you can come down here and get a photo right in front if you want. It works fine.
Mike is yours, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. I've enjoyed working with the municipal staff and the various assembly members these 23 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Robert, there's no one in the queue, but I just want to thank you for all the help that I've received from you throughout the years, and I want to wish you well. Thank you, Robert. And I just want to make one other comment. I just want everybody to realize, if you haven't already, that we've just lost 75 years of experience and expertise in municipal government. Wow, that's a lot of years and a lot of loss. So I wish all of you well. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now at Agenda Item 9E1, Information Memorandum 107-2016, Quarterly Bar Safety Hour Permit Report. Mr. Croft.
Yeah, I only pulled it because I am new
Move
to
to
this.
accept.
Thank you, Mr. Blonsky. Did we have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
No, that's quite all right. I appreciate it. I wasn't necessarily going to do that. But it needs to be done. This is 2 pages, 1 page double-sided, which really just lists the permits for this program. We're about later on the agenda to take the program from one that's sunsetted to just a part of our code. And I don't feel like this is enough information for me to gauge whether it's been a success, a failure, a nullity, what it's done. I'm learning more and more about the difficulty of alcohol and now marijuana enforcement, whether the state does any or us, how low a priority that is. But to take the program and extend it forever on this basis of knowledge, I'm just not prepared to do. So I pulled it because I'm going to, even though it's just an informational, I think it's an inadequate informational memorandum for me to make a decision. And for that reason, we'll be opposing the extension. But when we have something as significant as this, I'd like to have more information. So that's why I pulled it.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Dunbar.
Madam Chair, I think we'll have this conversation once it actually comes up on the agenda, but I'd like to address some of the things that Mr. Croft said, but I think I'll wait until we're actually debating the item.
I think that's a good idea. Thank you. Okay, there's no one else in the queue. Please vote. That item is accepted. We are done with the consent agenda. No, I'm sorry, we're not. We're at no, you're not going to pull that. No. You're not going to do it. But I need to make the motion. We're not going to do anything with it. No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Nope. We are now at agenda item 11A, AR 2016-189.
Madam Chair, I thought 9F2 was pulled.
Yeah, 9F2.
Thank you, everyone. It was pulled, but we have a substitute document, so we're not going to do anything.
I'm not going to introduce it. I just pulled it so it will die quietly, and we've got a substitute coming for it.
Okay. That is helpful to know. Thank you, Mr.
I know. I'm sorry.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, again, we are at agenda item number 11A, AO 2016-189, a resolution establishing certain supplemental contract conditions for potential marijuana vendors and marijuana trade show promoters in municipal facilities. This item was postponed from the July 12th meeting, and it was referred to the Public Safety Committee. Mr. Evans, do you have any comments? Okay, thank you. No, I only asked because you're the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Thank you, Mr. Evans. There is no one in the queue. Don't we have some conditions?
We have a motion. I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Mbosky. In a second.
Second.
Okay. Mr. Flynn, thank you.
Yeah, I just think this is deficient. We dealt with this years ago, and this does not address some of the issues that we already know arise when trade shows of this nature take place. So I'm going to vote no, but no hard feelings to those who choose to vote otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, so we had a conversation about this in the Public Safety Committee, I believe it was, and I appreciate the changes the administration made that they listed for us, but I do feel during the discussion in the Public Safety Committee, we're banning on-site consumption and a variety of other things, and it's very clear that we're not holding it to similar standards to which we hold alcohol. We have the Beer and Barley Wine Festival and things like that, and so I intend to vote for it, and I think we'll come back at some point and perhaps amend it. But I would, and I know that Mr. Croft has made the point in the past, and I think Ms. Zimbowski has as well, that we don't have to literally regulate marijuana exactly how you regulate alcohol. There'll be a variety of times when the two will differ. But I still feel that it's likely that we will end up coming back and revising this as the industry moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Ms. Zimbowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think for the public that's watching, it may be helpful if Ms. McConnell can just come up and give a brief synopsis of why we need to do this and what, in fact, this will do, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Ms. Zimbowski. Certainly. Welcome, Ms. McConnell.
Thank you. Erica McConnell, Office of Economic and Community Development. Last year, after the state had voted to legalize recreational marijuana, but before the state had finished writing regulations to regulate the industry, there was some people who came forward and wanted to do an event in the Denina Center, marijuana trade show. And so the Assembly passed AR 2015-130, which set some rules about how this event could happen in the Denina Center for this transitionary period before the state regulations were written and before the municipality had drafted its own regulations. Once those things happened, the regulations written and adopted both at the state level and the local level, this new AR 2016-189 kind of carries forward the same rules that were passed in 2015, taking out the language that talked about it as being just for the interim period. I apologize for not being at the Public Safety Committee. I had family in town, but I do understand there are concerns about having a place where people can consume at these events. However, there's two issues that would need to be addressed before that could happen. One is that the Assembly did pass a definition of public place that specifically mentions convention centers as being public places. And the second is that we have a secondhand smoke ordinance that prohibits smoking in public places. So those are two reasons why on-site consumption is proposed to be banned at events that take place in municipal facilities. Generally, other than that, it does restrict vendors to being, vendors that are exhibiting edibles to be licensed so that the edibles that they are showing have been through the approval process, both at the state and the municipal level. One of the changes we proposed was to require that there are signs about the restricting consumption on the premises. And this has been reviewed by the people who run the Denina Center and the Egan Center, so they were comfortable with it as well. Is that enough information?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you. I just want to point out to people, I think that helps. Thank you, Erica. Essentially, we did a temporary resolution saying these are the rules. This really doesn't change anything per se. It's just kind of cleaning up the language because now the state rules and our rules have been codified. So again, whether the discussion comes back to do we allow people to consume marijuana in public, I think Erica pointed out that the convention centers are public, and unlike alcohol, we do have places where you can consume alcohol, I guess, if you have a beer garden or something like that that's roped off. There's just differences. And so if Mr. Dunbar or anybody else wants to address it, we're just going to have to tackle those head on, I guess, is the best way to put it. But for now, I think this is just a clean way just to keep the ball going and keep the lines of communication clear between the industry and the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Botsky, and thank you so much for requesting a little bit of history because I think it was helpful to all of us. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be voting to approve this. I've heard the argument before, but we treat beer and wine differently. Well, beer and wine only affects the individual consuming it. Marijuana doesn't only affect the person consuming it. It also affects anybody that's affected in the surrounding area by the smoke. So we need to address that issue at some point in time, but this is sufficient for today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And there's a clause in here on number 8 that doesn't allow for the sale of seeds. And there's sort of a catch-22 situation that's been set up. You can't mail the seeds through the mail because that's illegal. You can't bring them across the border and drive through Canada to bring them back here. You can't fly it on a plane. So how do you legally get them here? And so I actually think since we do have legalization, it might make sense that we created our own market for our own seeds. And so that is something I think the legal department needs to take a look at, and we could discuss that and debate that sometime in the future. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. There is no one else in the queue. Please. Oh, Mr. Trainee.
Thank you. Too legal, would you do something for me? Item 15, line 16, where we deal with consumption of marijuana on the premises strictly prohibited. I want it also to reflect the current penalty if you're consuming it. It's fine to tell people you can't consume it there, but I also want something that just says, if you do, the fine is whatever it is. So the public understands. Just looking at this doesn't tell them what the fine is. I want them to know, if you would, please.
Through the chair, both in state law and in municipal code, the person who violates a section of public consumption of marijuana can be punishable by a fine of up to $100. So you could insert language saying consumption of marijuana on the premises is strictly prohibited and punishable by a fine of $100.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Trainee?
on advice of legal counsel, let's add a phrase into there to be consistent with state law that just says what it is.
Would you make a
Up to
motion?
$1,000 fine, Madam Chair. $100 fine, Madam Chair.
Would you make a motion, Mr. Trainee?
Motion's made, Madam Chair.
Would you repeat
The
it?
verbiage would be
And what line? What line?
would be line 17, where after strictly prohibited, add associated fine of $100. I just want the public to know, because when they see it, they don't understand the economic cost.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. So the motion is on line 17, after prohibited, add a comma and then, or a period, and then add associate fine of $100. Is that correct, Mr. Trainee?
Yes, Madam Chair.
May I have a second, please? Please vote on Mr. Trainee's amendment. That amendment passes. We now have before us the main motion, AO 2016-189, establishing certain supplemental contract conditions for potential marijuana vendors and marijuana trade show promoters at municipal facilities. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. Somebody missing? That resolution is approved. Can I have a motion to recess for 10 minutes and a second, please?
So moved, Madam Chair. Recess for 10 minutes.
Second. Seeing no objection, we recess for 10 minutes. I'd like to call back to order the meeting of August 23rd. We are now at agenda item number 13A, AR 2016-90, a resolution granting a public hearing regarding the conditional protest of the renewal of liquor license 1078 for Fantasies on 5th, LLC DBA Fantasies on 5th, located at 1911 East 5th Avenue, Anchorage, Alaska 99501. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard?
I'm sure you might tell them we're going to, motion be made to what we're talking about.
Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing none, public hearing is continued. Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chair, move to continue the public hearing to August 4th at the request of the plaintiff's attorney. October 4th, the request of plaintiff's attorney in this case.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. May I have a second? Thank you. Please vote to continue the public hearing of the meeting of October 4th. Anybody missing? That meeting will be continued until, the public hearing will be continued at the October 4th meeting. We are now at agenda item number 14A, Assembly Memorandum AM 554, 2016, rezoning of Lot 1, Block 15B, 3rd Edition, Anchorage. And it's in conjunction with ordinance number AO 2016-75. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? You do? Okay, great. Great. Excellent.
They're getting down here.
All right. Welcome. Please state your name and spell your last.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Klein, C-L-I-N-E, and I live at 1032 Cordova Street, directly across from the lot in question, across 11th Street. And I guess what I have to say is simply, I do not think this lot should be rezoned under any circumstance, unless there's a plan, which the community is quite active in developing, for zoning for the entire neighborhood. I think you've heard from well beyond the majority of the neighbors that we really don't want this rezoned, period. And that the reason for that is many, but I guess I would just like to ask you all, you move into a neighborhood, you live there over 25 years, you have expectations about what that neighborhood's going to be. In fact, what most of the houses in my neighborhood are on the west side of Cordova Street are not the maximum at all that would be allowed under R3, which is what we are zoned. It simply doesn't fit the neighborhood, and I request that you do everything to, at this point, stop any rezoning of that neighborhood. I will just emphasize my main reason for objecting it is primarily traffic. We do not need more people entering and exiting near that intersection or near the school. Today, just pulling out of my driveway in Cordova, I almost got hit by a school bus that undoubtedly didn't see me. Thank goodness there was a bike lane there. He was speeding in the school zone. That's typical. It's also an emergency access route. The fire trucks, the police trucks go down that street quite frequently. To have 5 families or 5 couples, 5 individuals, additional traffic pulling in and out of that intersection, which is quite blind when you come from the north, is just a real problem to me, very problematic. Anyway, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Ms. Domboski? Ms. Domboski?
Thank you. I don't have a question. I do have a point of order, though.
Thank you.
Or clarification. Let's put it that way. So the point of tonight. You
can have a seat, ma'am. Thank you.
The point of tonight, we've already remanded AO 2016-75 to the Planning and Zoning Commission for consideration. So the item in front of us is simply the AM to give direction of things to consider to the Planning and Zoning Commission, correct? So no matter what, the item in front of us should be what's being addressed. And if people have recommendations on maybe making the AM better or things to consider, that's what we should be hearing. Am I right?
I would refer to Mr. Flynn on that, Ms. Domboski. Thank you. Mr. Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Domboski is correct. We did, in fact, remand this to Planning and Zoning. during the public hearing, I pledged to this body that I would come back with an AM that gave some direction to planning and zoning to consider. And I also pledged to the neighbors that I'd give them the opportunity to review it and offer any recommendations they may have, which we welcome at this time.
Yeah, and what I heard from the last speaker, her concern was traffic, so that was valuable. And so, my recommendation, if people who want to testify want to make an impact on this AM, you have to give us recommendations or tell us what your concerns are. That would be the most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Anyone else wish to be heard? Yes. Welcome. Please state your name and spell your last.
Hi, my name's Kathy Holt, and my last name's H-O-L-T.
Would you talk into the microphone, please?
H-O-L-T.
Great. Thank you. You can pull it down.
And some of mine were like on lot coverage going from 3 to 4, jumps from 40% to 60%, and that's a big difference of what they can cover that lot with. And it's already a small lot. It would be under the size for R3, even for more than 4 units. And then you want to bump it to R4 and give it more coverage. It doesn't seem fair to that neighborhood at all. And parking is a huge issue, which I don't see how that can be contained. And access to this lot, the only place, I see is the alley, and I noticed Mr. Flynn wrote down with limited access on 11th. I don't think that should even be an option because of the stop sign and the traffic there. There should not be any kind of access off 11th or Cordova. And those are my, parking is a huge issue. Let me see. I'm just looking for open space too. On open space under R3 is allowed like 250 square feet per unit, and when you bump up to R4, you're only allowed 100. That's like less, well, what is it, 40% or 35% or something of what, it's a big change. And I don't agree with that, and I absolutely don't agree with the height. I want, it should not go any higher than what R3 allows. Those are my main
Thank you very much.
comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome, sir.
My name is Ken Stone, S-T-O-N-E. I live at 217 East 11th. My recommendation to be added would be that if and when Planning and Zoning puts their rubber stamp on it, that it contain language to keep the rezone with the current owner only, so that if he sells it, it does not stay as an R4 but reverts to an R3.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to be heard? Good evening.
My name is Jeanette Greenbaum, and I live at 231 East 11th. I'm a little disappointed that there is some of these limitations, the height limitations, appropriate with the neighborhood. Right now, we're an R3, which is 35 feet, and R4 is 45 feet. So I would have liked to see a height limitation specifically said 35 feet, to be clear to planning and zoning what that means, because as a neighborhood, we are R3 and 35 feet. I'd also like to talk a little bit about that limitation of 5 units. Right now, it sits as an R3, which requires 6,000 square feet for 3 to 4 units. This is a 7,000 square foot lot. And the minimum for an R3 with 5 or more lots or 5 or more units is 8,500 square feet. So we're already talking about a 1,500 square foot reduction in a lot size. I just don't see how 5 units should ever even be acceptable. It's just not an appropriate lot for this neighborhood. Lack of parking is huge, and I think we've all talked about that. And I just don't really think access on 11th is really even doable. I know the duplexes to the west of it do not have driveways off of 11th Avenue as well, which is helpful, but they still park on the street there, which is a problem during school hours. I think that is the big points. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else wish to be heard? Hello.
Hi. I'm short. My name's Rosemary Karish, K-A-R-I-S-H. I live right across the street. Unlike Usain Bolt, who's triple for triple, we're kind of double for triple here. This is our second appearance here. We've gone through South Addition Community Council, Planning and Zoning, and back again at Assembly now. My main concerns, if you keep to the ordinance here, is, as most people have stated, the traffic and parking. If you have access off 11th Avenue, as I'm standing here, there's going to be an accident waiting to happen. You have a stop sign, you have Cordova, that's a busy street. People do not abide by the traffic, by the speed zone there. There's a school, there's a bus stop, you're going to have blind areas, you're coming down a hill, you turn onto 11th, and if somebody is at the stop sign, they're going to go boom. And you're going to have parked cars there if you put 5 units in here. Another concern I have is if it goes to R4, I think it needs to be in the owner's name only. If he sells it or if he goes bankrupt, then it reverts back to R3. I'm very concerned if he flips this property or if he goes bankrupt. We've had another development down the street go bankrupt, and I'm concerned with the economy, what's going to happen. We've had homes for sale in the neighborhood, can't sell them. So this is a concern, and I hope that we have asked the Assembly before. I know some Assembly members are familiar with the area, some may not be. I hope that you can take the opportunity to look at this lot, see the neighborhood that's involved. There's single-family homes, there's duplexes, and there's 2 apartment buildings that are only 4 units. Also, the homes on the north side of the street, I hope you can understand, our lots are smaller than the normal lots. We have 7 homes on our block instead of the normal 6. So we already have a higher density. If you look at the lot itself with Cordova, the dedicated bike lane, there's no parking there, the alley in the back, the stop sign, the utility pole, just the physical location, the physical surroundings of that lot isn't positive to put 5 units in there. And I just hope that I think you've realized by now, the strong community, the neighborhood's concern about this reason. We hope, we don't oppose the development, but 5 units is a lot for that lot. And please, if you do get downtown, look at the lot. Drive by, walk by, bike by, and get a chance to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Seth Anderson, A-N-D-E-R-S-E-N. Since our previous hearing about a month ago, I had a chance to meet with several of the neighbors and talk about special limitations. And in response to Mr. Flynn's memorandum, limiting the development to 5 units, that's fine. Our proposal is for 5 units at 2 bedrooms each. There's been some concern about 5 units, 5 families. 5 units doesn't necessarily say bedrooms or number of people are there. 5 units could be studios or other than that. So it's not necessarily that the impact is the units. It's more the total size and number of bedrooms. There was a recommendation to limit the number of bedrooms to a 4-unit R3 development. R3 doesn't limit the number of bedrooms, but we could conceptualize a 4-unit building with 3 bedrooms each. That would be 12 bedrooms. A special limitation clarification could be no more than 12 bedrooms on this site. Primary access from the alley and limited incursion onto 11th. Our plan is for 3 units to have vehicle access from the alley and 2 units to have vehicle access from the street. A clarification could be to limit access to only 2 units from 11th Avenue. I think that putting 5 units worth of cars off of an alley Would be a lot of congestion in a small area. It would end up being an unattractive spot to see basically a 50-foot by 40-foot area paved for parking. Height limitation, to maintain the height of R3 is fine. We don't propose to go more than 35 feet. There are some other dimensional standards that were mentioned. Lot coverage was one of them. For the multifamily development that we would propose, R3 and R4 actually have the same lot coverage at 60%. So there was a little bit of a clarification there. And parking isn't discussed in zoning categories. It's discussed under Title 21. And it's the same for R3 or R4 or R1. You have to have the amount of parking on site that's required by code. I don't see how additional parking special limitations would be applied. If imposing special limitations is a method that works to get this rezone approved, I think it's a good step towards facilitating new housing in this area. I do strongly believe that it's more appropriate to consider our housing needs and goals in Anchorage in general, instead of reacting to a specific project or concerns from a select group of people. We should look at things like the comprehensive plan, which identifies areas that are appropriate for higher density, neighborhood plans that encourage more housing near downtown, a land use plan map that shows higher density for this area than currently exists. We can look at the 2012 Anchorage Housing Market Analysis, which identifies downtown as the area with the greatest need for housing. We can look at AEDC's housing survey from last year that identified downtown as the most desirable area to live. There's a number of other documents that support changing demographics and changing desires. So yes, there is some special limitations that could work for us for a modest development. What I think would
Mr. Anderson, thank you very much.
satisfy the neighbors' concerns.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your time is up. Thank you. But Mr. Dunbar has a question.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry I lost the thread there a little bit when you were talking about the second limitation, about total number of bathrooms. So you said there was a way we could clarify it to make it a little, at least read easier, but if it remains as it is here, is that going to prevent you from moving forward? I mean, is this, it sounded like either way it would still work.
Right. So what it says now is limit the total number of bedrooms to which would be permitted in a 4-unit R3 development. R3 zoning doesn't dictate how many bedrooms a unit can have. It just says how many units the development could be. So it could be 4 units with 1 bedroom. It could be 4 units with 5 bedrooms. That's not going to limit the development of the site. So it could stay there. I don't think it needs to be there or applies in any way.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome, sir.
Yeah, my name's Jim Holt, and I've listened to this debate, and quite by accident, I bumped into the previous owner, Chris Cole, who'd owned this property for 5 years. Coincidentally, he happened to be an architect, and he tried for 5 years to responsibly put a multifamily unit on that property. And he said he could not, in good conscience, provide adequate parking, entry and egress on that size lot. And that's with 40% coverage. If you change the zoning, then you're up to 60% coverage. How are you going to provide those entry and egress and parking and whatnot with more coverage? He was quite adamant that there was really no need to change that zoning because it's too small a lot. And he had 5 years to figure it out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing and hearing none. Public hearing is now closed. Mr. Flynn.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'll move to approve.
Second.
Before we move forward, is Erica still here? I didn't see you. Yeah. Well, who's got this? I have a question about limiting it, the rezone to the current owner and whether we can do that. That would be a bit of a wrinkle that I'm not familiar with.
Through the chair, Mr. Flynn, I don't have an answer for that off the top of my head. I would need to consult the legal department.
All right. Mr. Falsey, you want to take this one on the fly, or you want to wait?
It would certainly be a question we would like to have a little more time to research. I am a bit skeptical of the approach, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. But we'd want to look into it further before we propose that route.
Okay, I hate to drag these nice folks through more discussion. However, it's not an entirely unreasonable request, and the public hearing is closed. So here's my intent, just for those who are in the audience. It sounds like limiting the height to 35 feet is a reasonable amendment to this, so I'll make that motion on line 22.
Second.
There are several folks in the queue, and I don't think it's to discuss your motion. So is that the only motion that you have right now?
For now, yeah.
Okay, so maybe we should go ahead and vote on that motion?
Unless someone else wants to speak to that specific item.
I don't see anyone else, Mr. Flynn. So let's vote on Mr. Flynn's motion before us. Please vote. That amendment is approved.
And then, Madam Chair, I would respectfully ask that we postpone final consideration of this item pending a review by legal as to limiting the rezone to the current owner, recognizing this still has to go through planning and zoning if it even actually occurs. So I'll move to postpone final consideration of this to our meeting of October 4.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Before we vote on that, there are several in the queue. Would you gentlemen still like to speak? And Mr. Bosky? Okay. Well, Mr. Dunbar.
So I originally wanted to talk on something else, but I think we've sort of moved past that. But Mr. Flynn, I was wondering, and perhaps Mr. Actually, never mind. Moving all the way to October 4th seems like quite a long time. Is there any way for us to provisionally request that P&Z does this pending review by legal or something along those lines? Because this is merely a recommendation to P&Z, correct? This is not a binding document.
Right, and I'm sorry, we should probably do it to September 13, not October 4. I looked at the wrong month. So
what's that?
Well, I should probably have said September 13, not October 4.
Okay.
But P&Z's agenda is such that they won't get to this for a couple of months, if I understand correctly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, in that regard, I guess I want to thank Mr. Flynn for your continued work on this and reaching out to the community. And it's a learning experience for me. I've never seen anything like this before, and so I'm learning a lot about this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And Mr. Flynn, so your motion is corrected to say September 13, correct? 13, yes.
Apologies.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, I guess I'll speak on that, but I wanted to speak on something else later, so put me back in the queue after. But I would not support postponing this anymore. I think you could get where you want to be. Maybe add another thing. Planning and Zoning Commission will consider the possibility of limiting this rezone to one owner, and then it could still go forward tonight towards the Planning and Zoning Commission, and that could be resolved at that level.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr.
You're welcome
Flynn?
to make a substitute motion, Mr. Weldon.
Can I make that motion then?
You may.
Do I have to remember what I just said? Can I do that now, Madam Chair, then make a
Certainly, Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, so I'd like to substitute, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, should I repeat it, or are we good?
Please repeat it.
Okay, I'd like to move that we add a consideration for the Planning and Zoning Commission that they consider the possibility that the rezone would apply only to the current owner.
On advice of City Legal Counsel.
Mr. Traney?
Madam Chair, on advice of City Legal Counsel, because he's the gentleman who has to represent us in court.
I accept that.
I want to make sure they wade into it before we put them into a situation that sends us back to court.
Right, yeah, I'll add that.
We have a first and a second. Madam Clerk, are you clear on that?
I am not.
Okay. All right. I didn't think so, because neither am I. But, Mr. Weddleton, would you mind writing that amendment? And so I'd be happy to repeat it so everybody's clear on it before we vote on it.
Okay, so.
Thank you.
The amendment is to add to this list of considerations for the Planning and Zoning Commission that they consider, let me jot it down as it goes, consider the rezone apply only to the current owner after the advice of the city attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton, and I think I have that down. I'm going to try and repeat it. The motion is that consideration for the P&Z that they consider the rezone abide to the current owner after advice from the city attorney. Is that clear to everybody? Yes, no, maybe?
Clear to me.
Thank you.
Do I hit move? Okay, you got that.
There was a second also. Mr. Dunbar seconds your motion. So let's vote on...
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry? I didn't hear you, Mr. Evans.
Discussion, please.
Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
I want to talk the main issues, and I just want people to understand, this is only an AM. This does not rezone anything. It's just a wish of the Assembly for consideration by P&Z. So theoretically, you could be back in front of us again. Should let you know. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Bosky?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think almost certainly this will be back before us. So just for clarity's sake, we've already remanded the rezone to Planning and Zoning for reconsideration of something they've already considered. And what we're trying to do now is give them the things we want them to consider. We'll see their comments, but ultimately the decision is going to be ours. That's what we anticipate. This will come back before us, and we'll see what they come up with. If they come up with anything new, they might just basically we said it was a good idea to begin with, and go for it. When it goes back to the motion from Mr. Weddleton, I see where you're going, but when we're talking about a rezone, my understanding is once you rezone a property, the property is rezoned. It doesn't go with the owner. It's the property. So in this particular case, hypothetically, the only way, in my mind, this would ever work would be put a conditional time certain until the building's built. Because once the building's built, what are you going to sell it and then say, no, you have to tear down the building? That doesn't make any sense at all. So to me, this would be, if the Assembly is going to do something like this is not a P&Z issue. This is something that needs to be vetted through the League Department, and you need to find a way you could do this in a structured, logical thing. And there is no way Planning and Zoning is ever going to go out on this limb because it's never been done before, to my knowledge. So to me, again, this is why the legislative body, we are the ones that can make decisions like this. Planning and Zoning isn't going to touch this one with a 10-foot pole, in my opinion, humble opinion. Mr. Weddleton, you served on the body, so you know better than I do. But this is kind of out of the box, and that's usually the stuff that the Assembly does, not necessarily P&Z. So for that reason, I think this is not a necessary. I mean, it might be interesting to see what their comments are and their ideas, but ultimately, if the amendment is put into this rezone, I think it'll have to be put in by the Assembly. So I'll support it just to see what Planning and Zoning's comments are on this particular topic, but I don't want to hold it out to Assembly members expecting to get something profound from P&Z as far as declarative, yes, we're going to do this, because I think a lot of them that are going to sit on that body are going to say, what, this is weird, we've never done this before, you can't do this. That's typically, I think, what you'll get. So I'll go along just to see what their comments are, but ultimately this, to me, is going to be a huge decision with major implications if the Assembly goes down this route, because we've never done it before. So legal is definitely going to have to be vetting this one from every angle to make sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.
Thank you, Mr. Bosky. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just think that even the concept of zoning based upon who the owner is an exceedingly bad idea. Matter of fact, I'm kind of stunned that we're considering it. You talk about your ultimate in spot zoning, which we're trying to be avoiding. We're saying either the zoning is correct and it's appropriate based on all the criteria we use to zone it or change the zoning on it, or it's not. And it shouldn't matter who the owner is, whether we like the owner or not, unless there's some kind of flagrant problem with the owner. But I'll vote against the amendment, and I think it's an absolutely disastrous precedent to start zoning based on who the owner is. So I urge you to reconsider that.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Dunbar?
So I'll just say, I think this was the original idea I'd proposed to Mr. Flynn, largely because I don't want to see it delayed anymore, and I want us to continue moving forward with this. And so I'm glad that Mr. Weddleton was able to articulate it a little bit better than myself, and I intend to vote for it.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton.
Well, I agree with Ms. Domboski and Evans. It does seem very odd and bizarre. My intent is simply to continue to move this forward to the Planning Commission. I think they'll look at it, evaluate it just as you have, and recommend we ignore it. I just don't, I'm not comfortable. My intent was so that we will move this along tonight and not delay it.
Mr. Weddleton, would you like to withdraw your motion? Just asking.
Well, not if it goes back to delaying this until September. I mean,
Okay.
If it satisfies Mr. Flynn that it goes forward, then I hope everyone supports it in its unusual fashion and we move this forward. And I do have another amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Falsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Without going back on my reticence to extemporaneously provide legal advice, I did want to share that some of the motivation for my skepticism can be found in the code. So in the rezoning section itself, the Assembly has already said that zoning is intended to provide a degree of certainty that is important for long-term investment in neighborhood cohesion and stability. The purpose of rezoning is not to relieve particular hardships, nor to confer special privileges or rights on any person, but to make adjustments in the official zoning map that are necessary in light of changed conditions or changes in public policy. And the criteria for approving a rezoning are all set out in that subsection E, none of which would obviously seem to vary on the identity of the owners of the property to be rezoned. So I think there would be serious questions about whether it would be arbitrary or capricious to provide for a rezone that depends on the ownership of the parcels being rezoned. But as I say, if that is the direction the Assembly wishes to have us investigate, we're happy to investigate that question.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Weddleton.
I would withdraw the amendment and suggest that given that information from Mr. Falsey that it also removes any reason to delay it to investigate further.
So you're withdrawing the motion. Mr. Dunbar, would you like to withdraw
I
your
also
second?
withdraw.
Thank you. So that's off the floor. Mr. Domboski.
Madam Chair, with that, I'll simultaneously withdraw my motion to postpone.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Domboski.
Thank you. I think Mr. Flynn probably addressed my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
I'd like to make an amendment, and that is to line 15 to delete the words and amend its proposed rezone to R4 accordingly.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Your proposed amendment is to delete, on line 15, to put a period after limitations and delete everything after that, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. And there was a second from Mr. Croft, and there's no one in the queue. Mr. Domboski.
Yeah, Mr. Weddleton, I'm trying to follow you here. Can you explain that a little bit?
Thanks. The intent is just that seems like it's instructing the Planning Commission to do those special limitations, where I believe the intent really is for them just to take a third look at this and give some thought to these
I agree.
And I'm more comfortable with that. The
Thank you.
Planning Commission is actually exceptionally good, very active, and I trust their judgment.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Domboski. There's no one in the queue. Please vote on Mr. Weddleton's proposed amendment. That amendment is approved. We are now at the main motion on the floor. It's A.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment.
Mr. Domboski.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, I'd like to amend line 21 to, right after the word avenue, 11th Avenue, just put a comma. I'm just going to make it simple. Or prohibit or recommend limited incursion onto 11th Avenue to 2 units. Does that make sense? Essentially, just let me explain really quick. Mr. Flynn has put in here basically, he's pointing out the off-street parking and the minimal incursion onto 11th Avenue, but we did hear the property owner potentially recommend limiting it to 2 units, and we heard the homeowners in the neighborhood recommending prohibiting incursion onto 11th Avenue. So I want to make sure all options are on the table for P&Z to actually think about. And I think if we put it in there, they'll consider all options basically, not just, they're going to limit it to 5 cars or whatever, or, 2 units or 3 units. I want to make sure that they consider also prohibiting incursion onto 11th.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Did we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. And if I can just read what I think you said, Mr. Dombrowski. On line 21, after avenue, put a comma, and then add or prohibit or recommend limited incursion on 11th Avenue to 2 units. Is that correct, Mr. Dombrowski?
That's correct.
Thank you. That's the proposed amendment on the floor, and I don't see anyone in the queue, so please vote on Mr. Dombrowski's proposed amendment. Everybody vote? That amendment was approved. We are now at the main motion, AM 554-2016, and I don't see anyone in the queue. So, Mr. Croft.
Yeah, sorry. Now we're on the main motion. I'd just like to make clear, I do know this piece of property. I 20 years ago helped clear it out, and we wanted more visibility at that time, 1996, to see the people that are back there. I've gone back there, attempted to knock on your door, Rosemary, but also just walked the premises again. I continue to worry that this kind of spot rezoning is problematic in general, and in this particular parcel, doing it based on the idea that we want more intensity downtown, or that next door across the street, which has a different zoning, should bleed into this. I think if we want to do that, we should have the courage to say we are rezoning this area for higher density, that we no longer want it to be mixed residential, we want it to be multifamily residential, and have that debate about whether that's appropriate for this section of town or not to do it in this way. And so I continue to oppose this particular idea. The developer seems fine, and maybe even the proposal is a generically acceptable one. But I don't like this process or what it leads to. I think if we're going to do this, we ought to confront the citizens of this area with a direct proposal to say, here's why it should be rezoned to multifamily and not done in this way. I'll support this today because it'll send it back with recommendations, but when it comes back, I continue to have those difficulties with this rezone.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Traney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to support this, nor will I support it when it comes back. 7,000 square foot is just too darn little to put this type of development on it. And I worry what it does to the residents that live there. They keep coming back and coming back. There was an ad that was ran last assembly race about a guy, I think it was on a business on Northern Lights, that had come back to the assembly 4 or 5 times. We just should deal with this issue and be done with it. I'm not going to be in favor of this AM going to PNC. I'd like to kill the whole thing off. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it seems unusual that we are spending this much time debating on whether there's 4 units or 5 units on this lot, especially since, and where they're talking about creating too much traffic. In my district, we just went to a grand opening of 49 additional units last week, and in a couple months they're going to be adding another 100 units just down the street from that. So we are in a period of development and redevelopment where things are going to be denser. That's just the unfortunate reality of where we are. The buildable land in this city is almost all used. So spending this much time arguing over whether it's 4 or 5 units just seems almost fruitless. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. There's no one else in the queue. We're voting on the main motion, AM 554-2016. No one else in the queue. Please vote. That memorandum was approved. We are now at agenda item number 14B, AO 2016-87, an ordinance authorizing the disposal by non-exclusive underground telecommunications and electrical easements and a revocable use permit in the dedicated Kincaid Park to Alaska Wireless Network, LLC. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the Assembly and staff, My name is Mark Modrow, M-O-D-E-R-O-W, representing GCI and its wholly owned subsidiary, the Alaska Wireless Network. I'm accompanied by Cindy Coughlin, AWN Site Acquisition Specialist, and Travis Drake, who would be the AWN Project Manager. We are here tonight to express GCI's continuing interest and support for this important project, which we believe will provide infrastructure to Kincaid Park and its environs, filling a significant coverage gap within not only Kincaid Park, but the adjacent coastal refuge and the coastal trail. We're also here to be available to you if you have any questions concerning GCI's involvement in the project. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There's no one in the queue. Anyone else wish to be heard? Mr. Traney?
Sir, just a quick question. I understand you guys have done analysis on the amount of the dead zone in Kincaid Park. This will take care of that problem?
Essentially, yes. Okay. Yes. Outdoor coverage will, hills get in the way, hills, foliage get in the way, but essentially the entire park and for outside coverage, the coastal trail and the coast will be covered.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate
it. Thank you, Mr. Traney. Mr. Peterson, do you have a question of this gentleman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, as long as you're right handy there. In the Community and Economic Development Committee, we were shown a picture of a temporary tower that you had out in the Kincaid area, and that was evidently not very effective, and so you found a better location to put this camouflage tower on that will actually provide sufficient coverage. And the reason that we feel, at least the reason I feel this is important, is public safety reasons. There can be incidences that could happen in that park because there is wildlife there regularly. So, if you get to a point where there's no coverage, sometimes minutes can mean the difference in someone's life. So, so you have found a location where your tower will actually provide the coverage that.
Yes, there's actually two facilities, two smaller facilities in the park. One is the cow, the cellular on wheels that you were referring to, that's just off a trail there. That is screened by vegetation. It's also in a non-optimum place in the park. It only provides coverage to portions of the park. There's also a small installation right outside what everybody calls the waxing bunker, which also provides some coverage to portions of the park. By using the hill adjacent to the soccer field and using that in the design parameters, the new tower would provide coverage for the entire area. It also is designed so that any other major carrier that wishes to put their own facilities on it can, but for emergency services 911, any carrier would provide that to the entire wireless user group.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, sir. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome. Yeah, right.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly. My name is Tom Meacham, and I've discussed this matter with Assemblyman Weddleton, and we've been looking at Section 1002, parentheses 8 of the Charter, which requires that an interest in real property, if it's to be conveyed out of a dedicated park, it's valid only upon approval by a majority of those voting on the question at an election. And I understand that this arrangement with the cellular operator has been structured so that it apparently fits within the definition of an insubstantial interest in public parkland by a series of one-year permits revocable, I guess at the end of the year, or revocable upon notice. And frankly, I've been long an advocate of strong legal protection for our dedicated parks, and I'm worried that while this may meet the legal parameters, it's been structured so that it skirts around the requirement of a public vote. And I'm frankly surprised that the cell operator is willing to invest what apparently is a large amount of money on the basis of 1, 2, or 3 one-year permits that may or may not be renewed. And my suggestion to get this project moving and yet to provide the protection of the parks that I think is warranted by the ordinance would be to grant the permit for 1 year, but schedule a public vote at the next election so that the municipality would have much more freedom in structuring a more long-term arrangement with the cell operator if the public vote is positive. And of course, I think there are enough indications that this kind of cell coverage is needed out there, so I would think that going to a public vote would not run much risk for either the municipality or the cell operator. But I guess I just wanted to express my concern that the matter is structured so that a series of 1 year revocable permits gets around the public vote requirement, and yet the investment by the cell operator is very substantial, and I'm surprised that it would be willing to go ahead on the basis of 1, 2, or 3 1-year permits, unless there's been some understanding that those permits will continue on into the future, which I think would be a clear skirting of the public vote requirement. But that's all I have
Thank you,
to
sir.
offer. Thank
There's
you.
no one in the queue. Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Approve.
Mr. Whittleton.
Just on this, the Community and Economic Development Committee considered this and forwarded no recommendation. I do, however, have a recommendation. I believe this lease must go to a vote as required by the charter. We heard at that meeting, the Community Development Committee, that the requirements, the requirements of the charter should be scrupulously observed in all land transactions, no matter how beneficial the project is. And this is a beneficial project. It would be wonderful to have this in the park. Anything less than following the charter carefully raises long-term questions of legality, and it damages the public trust. This lease is intentionally designed to squeeze under the $50,000 limit on interest in the land. If it were the more typical 5 to 10 years, it would be above that limit. The typical lease does not have the revocable provision because it's not realistic that a company would invest hundreds of thousands of dollars with the possibility that they have to pull everything out within a month. And we saw recently an auditor's report that a municipal employee got in trouble for using one of these city credit cards to purchase something that was a proper purchase. It was a good thing to have bought, but it was over his credit limit. So he broke that transaction up into 4 transactions to get under the rules. And he was chastised for that because it was incorrect. That's improper. And what we have here is a case where we are doing something similar. There's a clear rule. It's in the charter. But the terms have been manipulated in an unusual way, not similar to other cell tower leases by the city, to get underneath the rules. And I believe that violates the public trust. When this lease fails, I hope it does tonight, I will introduce something to go on the ballot in April, and I expect that I would support it strongly, and I expect it would pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Falsey, Section 3 on this ordinance, did that come from your department? Is it legally sufficient from your point of view to conform to the city charter?
Through the chair, yes, we did assist with that language in Section 3, and we believe it would satisfy the requirements of the charter. To set the table for the Assembly on this, the action before the body involves at least 2 sections of the charter. Since 1975, Section 10.02.8 has read as follows. In addition to other actions which require an ordinance, the Assembly shall use ordinances to convey or lease or authorize the conveyance or lease of any interest in lands of the municipality. And it goes on to say, an ordinance conveying an interest in real property dedicated to a public park or recreational purposes is valid only upon a majority of those voting on the question at a regular or special election. That provision proved administratively difficult because it required all conveyances of all easements, of all conveyances, leases, etc., to come before the Assembly and to be enacted as an ordinance, which necessarily meant at least a 2-week delay before the Assembly could act. In October 1979, the Assembly sent to the voters a charter amendment which gave the term an interest in lands a specific definition. So since 1979, our charter has also provided in Section 1713E, an interest in lands means any estate in real property or improvements thereon, excluding revocable permits or licenses, rights-of-way, or easements which the Assembly finds to be without substantial value to the Assembly. In this case, the Assembly is being asked to look at an easement and a revocable use permit, and it is within the purview of the Assembly to make the decision as to whether what is being conveyed as a result of that revocable use permit and those easements is with or without substantial value to the Assembly. I think in this instance, that question has always been been viewed by what the Assembly would be giving up if those conveyances or permits were issued. And here, this is a small section of a much larger park that is not part of a trail system, that is not often used. And the Assembly very well could find that it is without substantial value, and that's what's proposed in Section 3. I'll say that this conversation is somewhat complicated by the fact that the Assembly also adopted code language in which they instructed the administration that there are a category of interest in lands and conveyances that they will per se deem to be without substantial value. And that's where the additional tests of whether it is for 1 year or less or $50,000 or less has come into the conversation. But those are not charter requirements and are not criteria that would even need to be complied with to meet the charter's rules.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Madam Chair, I'll be supporting this at this time. It needs to be done. Dead zones are not good. We have a lot of kids that go and play in that area, and as we were saying before, they run around the trail and moose hits them, we have a problem. They need to contact somebody. And the fact the company will have to pull out within 30 days if the license is removed from them, and they're willing to do that. So I'll be supporting this, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Traney. Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, will be supporting this ordinance. There is, I think, an immediate public safety issue in Kincaid Park. I've spent a lot of time at the motocross track, which is in Kincaid, it's a complete dead zone for cell coverage, and you have people engaging in somewhat high-risk activities. There are people getting hurt there. It's hard to get, response when there's not a race going on and people are just practicing. So to the extent that this alleviates that concern, I think it's important that we go forward with it. With respect to Mr. Weddleton's concerns, I think, Mr. Falsey answered that quite well. I think, as far as the charter goes, the leasing of this little space for a stealth cell tower, which looks like a tree in the park, I do not believe is conveying a substantial interest that should require a vote of the people just to do that. If we have to tinker with having a vote, I would suggest we have a vote over actually making an express exception for this, so that every time that we want to add a cell tower to a park in similar circumstances, we're not doing another vote to the people. It seems ridiculous that the public trust would be violated by this very minimal incursion, which most people won't even notice once it's up. So I encourage my colleagues here to support this, and if we need to fix any kind of code or charter provisions, that we do so afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Falsey, I just wanted to follow up on what you said, because write it down. I think I'm actually going to agree with you. So when you were talking about the action that the Assembly said to lay out in code what a substantial interest was, the Assembly has clearly signaled to an administration, listen, if it's less than a year, if it's less than $50,000, these are all things that we deem to not be substantial interests, correct?
That is correct.
But that does not exclude us from adding other things to the list. Or it's not in its totality, these are the only things. I mean, I guess my point is, it wasn't the voters who defined the substantial interest, it's the Assembly, right?
Through the Chair, that is correct.
So going down that line of thinking, which you've laid out, I think you've made your case that, in fact, the Assembly gets to determine what is a substantial interest. And just because we've previously said, okay, you don't have to come to us with all these little things, because these things, less than a year, less than 50,000, we've already said aren't substantial interests, it doesn't mean that other things also can't be of a substantial interest or a non-substantial interest, right? Does that make sense? Did you follow me?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So with that, I will be supporting this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Flynn.
Slope. I've seen this sort of stealth tower. I think it would be a reasonable addition to the park. I appreciate GCI's willingness to make the investment. I think Mr. Weddleton makes a good point. If it were me, I'd be nervous about making an investment on a one-year revocable basis. I think I'm not going to try and speak for another entity, but I think they're taking the chance that the body politic will find this to be a pleasant addition to the park and a positive addition to coverage in the area. But I think Mr. Weddleton is correct. If we're going to essentially give away an interest that is in fact greater than $50,000, even though we've parsed it so that it doesn't appear to be on paper, we should go to the voters, and I think they'll support it, and I'd ask them to support it. My family recreates in the park. They've been in the dead zones and said, gee whiz, it sure would be nice if we could find our way out of here. So I think it would be a positive addition, but I do think we'd be better off seeking voter approval for this. So I'll join Mr. Weddleton in opposing it, and I'll join him in supporting his substitute ordinance should we get to that point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Mr. Mbosky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think I made my point, apparently, so I'm going to go back for one more bite. My point with that exchange between myself and Mr. Falsey was there's nothing in the charter that says $50,000 is a substantial interest. My point was, in the code, the Assembly has articulated there's a couple different things that we've already, right out of the gates, we're telling you is, if it gets above this threshold, come to us. But it's not precluding the fact that we can define other things as not being a substantial interest. So my point is, I think Mr. Falsey has made his case. This barometer of $50,000 or one-year lease is not in the charter. It's not there. It's just things that we've already given administrations, basically the green light. You don't have to come to us for every little thing if these are the criteria. So in this particular case, even if it was over $50,000, the fact that it's a one-year revocable lease that can be revoked at any time, to me, makes it a non-substantial interest, because we can take it back anytime we want. So I don't think the barometer of $50,000, I don't care if you put it over, 3 years, because we can revoke the lease at any time, that's the reason I believe this does not have a substantial interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mbosky. Mr. Trainee.
Mr. Mbosky, as a resident expert on cell towers, you're the only one that has this type. So how does it look? Is it obstructing your view?
No, I have it out my front window, and I don't even notice it, to be honest with you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Trainee, I need to make a quick comment. Thank you.
Ms. Gray-Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I just want to thank Mr. Weddleton and his efforts to protect the public interest. I really appreciate you bringing forward, and your comment, actually. But I also appreciate the dialogue between Mr. Falsey and Mr. Mbosky, because it got even clearer to me that we weren't doing anything wrong this evening by approving this ordinance. Therefore, I will definitely be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, ma'am.
There's no one else in the queue. Please vote. Everybody in? This ordinance has been approved. Next item on the agenda is item 14C, AO 2016, an ordinance to amend Anchorage Municipal Code 15.05 to clarify procedures for imposing civil penalties, civil fines, or for obtaining injunction relief, to remove gender language, and to clarify the scope of the director's ability to delegate responsibilities under Title 15. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Thank you, Mr. Mbosky. There's no one in the queue. Please vote.
Before we vote, I just want to point out how well this conforms with the charter amendment I authored last time. So.
Well, thank you, Mr. Flynn.
And the voters passed.
Thank you. Please vote. This ordinance was approved. Next item on the agenda is item 14D, AO 2016-91, an ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code, Chapter 6.40, to clarify close of the fiscal year. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing. Welcome, sir. Please state your name, spell your last.
My name is Brian Miller, and last name is spelled M-I-L-L-E-R. I just have a few things I'd like to point out about this ordinance and the associated memorandum. One of the things that it says in the memorandum is that there are accounting requirements and standards that have changed materially, requiring this change to the code. I would just note that there's no actual standards cited in this memorandum to actually say what those changes might have been, and I would suggest that you guys might like to know what those are. I'd also note that it says that these changes, that these requirements were originally defined in the 70s, and that these standards have changed a lot since then. I'd also note that back in the 70s, everyone was doing accounting with paper and pencils, and there are efficiencies that we've gained since then with computers and spreadsheets and things like that. And those are both things that make me think that the justification for this is a little weak. I'd also point out that the way this is written, the ordinance itself, it says that the change is for the purposes of this section. The close of the fiscal year occurs after the municipality receives all necessary information from the state and other entities, and when the municipality's books and records have been fully adjusted for the fiscal year. Well, what I think that does is I think that completely uncouples the close of the fiscal year from the calendar. And it gives the finance department basically the ability to decide when the financial statements come out. And to me, that gives them sort of an open-ended ability to just keep pushing it off for who knows how long, and I think that there could be some unintended consequences that might arise from that. So that was pretty much what I wanted to share.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard?
Well, I have a question there.
Mr. Weddleton, sorry about that.
Sorry, thanks for your comments. So what intended consequences?
There are possibly implications for the new SAP system as far as how we have to close the books in that system that may not allow us to extend the deadlines like that. There may be some questions about possibly needing to get reports to bond issuers or bond councils, things like that. I don't have a lot of details. I didn't have a chance to do a lot of research. I just found out about this today, so I can't give you any specifics on that. And I would urge you not to take my word for it. Maybe the best idea is to postpone this and maybe have someone do a little more research on that stuff. Would be my thought.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Trainee.
Sir, just a question. Do you work for the city?
I do.
Where at?
I'm an accountant at Municipal Light and Power.
Okay.
Thank
you. That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Harris, yeah.
Your comment on this?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Madam Chair. So just a couple of things with respect to the background. Some of the things that have changed in the 30-plus years since the city and the borough unified. In those days, it was possible for auditors to come and to provide an opinion letter within that 90-day period. One of the standards that has changed is the impact that the auditors no longer are comfortable providing an opinion letter until all the books have been closed. And one of the things that happens there is that we continue to have bills that roll in and that are paid in January, February, call them the 13th, 14th, and even the 15th month. So the idea was to basically a housekeeping issue here of cleaning up when we say, okay, we're closing the books on the fiscal year and moving forward. And this year, I think, probably brought it into focus perhaps more than other years. We have from the state of Alaska, the PERS liability, GASB 68, that's been hanging out there. And we just got word this afternoon that they're not going to actually have their numbers available until mid-September now. So we actually won't have closed out set of accounting CAFR till sometime 30 days after that. I mean, we and every other entity around the state are in this world in which we can't finalize the CAFR. So when that issue came up, we sort of started asking ourselves, what is the close of the fiscal year? And this is simply a housekeeping matter to try to clean up the language in the code and kind of clarify when that is.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Thank you, sir.
So thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. There's no one else in the queue. Oh, I'm sorry. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none. Public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Mr. Trainee.
Move to approve.
Mr. Trainee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you want to talk about this?
No. Let me go to Mr. Domboski before you do that. Mr. Domboski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Harris, so let's just, I'll put my tinfoil hat in the drawer here. So let's just get it out there so nobody's afraid of this. Effectively, what I'm hearing is there's this fear that basically we're never going to close the book, so we're never going to tell anybody what's really going on in the government, what we're really spending. Can you give us some clarity and give us some confidence that just by tweaking this language, I don't see a date certain in there. So without seeing that, what confidence do we have we're actually going to get all the information and get the books closed?
Through the chair, Ms. Domboski, well, we're required by code to have the books closed out and done. All this is simply trying to do is to sort of recognize that accounting principles have changed. It takes us time now to get all the bills brought in, paid, allocated. Once we do that, we close out the books, and from that point forward, we typically require about 90 days to close out our books. So normally, in a normal year, we'd have everything done by June 30th.
Okay.
And this year, we just have been hanging out there because the state hasn't given us that final piece of information. And this year, just to kind of go back to one of the questions that was asked, what we would do in this case, what we did this year, we didn't have the CAFR finalized, so we shared with our rating agencies the draft CAFR with a letter that said we and everybody else in Alaska and in other jurisdictions are just hanging out there right now waiting for this final information to come out. They all understand that, and they were fine with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Trainee.
Thank you. Ms. Gray-Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I have to start out by saying, to some extent, I agree with Mr. Miller, the gentleman that testified a few moments ago. But things have changed substantially. Number one, we have more funds that our auditors have to review, way more than when the charter was established, and things have really changed. With that said, I'd like to offer an amendment, and I'll state the purpose of the amendment. The purpose of this amendment is to provide a uniform definition of close of the fiscal year throughout all municipal charter, Article 8. The term close of fiscal year appears both in Section 1310, Financial Audit, and Section 1307, Lapse of Appropriations. This amendment removes the specific reference to Section 1307, thereby applying the definition provided in this ordinance broadly to Article 8. This extends the definition of close of business year to the lapse of appropriations in Section 13.07 as well. Therefore, the amendment, beginning on page 2, line 4, delete 1310 and insert 13.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
You'll second it? Okay. Discussion from Assembly members? Mr. Domboski.
Yeah, we're treading into land where I'm really not that comfortable right now, and I do have significant experience with some of this, but I'm going back to Mr. Harris. I don't really feel like you answered my question, and now we're having an amendment that says the purpose is to provide uniform definition of close the fiscal year throughout all of the Anchorage Municipal Charter. And I don't know, you got to give me some explanation, because now we're getting into the land where I'm getting uncomfortable, and I don't feel like we're having definitive answers, and I'm not going to vote for something if I feel like it's making it grayer, and I guess that's where I'm at. I'm feeling like we're muddying the waters. We're not clarifying anything.
Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Harris?
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Domboski. So, one of the approaches we considered was to say, okay, we're going to change it from a 90-day limit to a 180-day limit, but that would not necessarily get us to the, I think what we want to do is we want to close out the fiscal year as quickly as we can and get our CAFR out. Typically that happens within 180 days, but this year was the clear case where 180 days wouldn't have been sufficient. So we tried to have a general enough set of language that, we got our books closed as quickly as we can, and then pretty much from that point on, we have about 90 days to finish. So I would expect that in the future, going forward, unless the state throws us a curve as they've done this year, that we're always going to be done by June 30th. That's my expectation, if not earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Anything else, Mr. Dombrowski?
Well, if that's the case, why can't we just change the code, say June 30th?
Through the chair, Ms. Dombrowski, again, the reason for choosing that language was
again, to give flexibility. I understand that, and that flexibility is the part that I have a problem with, I guess. Things happen, but creating ambiguity to do this catch-all, the fear is, and I heard it from someone who testified, the fear is we're going to keep these books open forever and we're never going to have a definitive, and I don't think that's where we're going, but how do we create confidence in the government when we're creating muddier waters? I don't understand this. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr.
I don't think this is a good idea.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Falsey is in the queue. I'm going to ask you to speak before Mr. Peterson, if Mr. Peterson doesn't mind.
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Falsey.
I thought I would just try another angle on this, which is to say the Charter itself sets the rules, and the Charter distinguishes between the end of the fiscal year and the close of the fiscal year without defining what the close of the fiscal year means at all. So the situation prior to the Assembly acting on an ordinance is that there is near total ambiguity as to what that means. That practically had an effect for our auditing team this year when they went to the rating agencies and said, well, we don't have a finalized CAFR yet because we're still waiting on very necessary information for the state. And what this ordinance in part is designed to do is to regularize that for the eventuality that we are forced into similar conversations with rating agencies in the future, where we can say there's nothing particularly irregular from the municipality standpoint that we haven't been able to close the books because we are still waiting on information from the state. But we will then comply with the Charter as soon as we actually close the books, and then the 90-day window is actually triggered. All of which is to say, I don't think it is accurate to say that this ordinance does anything to make the standard more gray or to muddy the water. I think, if anything, it is making it more definite. As to the amendment itself, I understand that the motivation for the amendment was to tend to the fact that the Charter uses the phrase close of the fiscal year twice, once in the financial audit section and once in the lapse of appropriation section. Because we were only attending to the financial audits, we said for purposes of the financial audit section of the Charter, this is what close of the fiscal year means. There was a question that was then raised by others as to whether that created an implication that close of the fiscal year could mean one thing for one section of the Charter and something else for another section of the Charter. So my understanding of the amendment is to say, no, we're not trying to fracture the meaning of close of the fiscal year between two different sections of the Charter. The last thing I would add is only to say on this particular amendment that I think it would be slightly more accurate to say that that for purposes of Article 13 rather than Section 13 when the language is all said and done, if that is the intent of the mover.
Thank you, Mr. Falsey. Mr. Peterson?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I was just going to say there are circumstances beyond our control. We can't close out our books until we get the information we need from the state. It was a rough year down in Juneau. The state's in a difficult situation. We don't know if that's going to continue next year or not. We hope it doesn't. But I think this gives us a definition to where we can wait until we get the information from them and then close out our books. And I understand it does have effect on our bond rating, and so I think this makes perfect sense to me, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Evans?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, too, will be supporting the amendment and the underlying change. Currently, close of fiscal year is just not defined. We could have used whatever we wanted. I think this does bring, like Mr. Falsey said, actually some clarity to it, even though it is a non-specified date. So even though it is confusing and a little scary because we're talking about a Charter and fiscal year, it does seem to make sense to me, and I will be supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Ms. Gray-Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Traney. the municipality's fiscal year is from January 1st through December 31st, okay? And like I said earlier, I agree with Mr. Miller to a certain extent. But here's the thing that encouraged me to support this ordinance. If the charter said end of fiscal year, to me, the end of the fiscal year is December 31st. So I would really have an issue supporting this ordinance if the charter said end of fiscal year, but it doesn't. It says close of fiscal year, and I know that everything's not said and done in this municipality until the 14th month. And so with that said, that's the reason why I'm going to be supporting this change. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Flynn, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll defer to the maker of the amendment if the preference is that I amend the amendment or make a subsequent amendment. But I picked up on something Mr. Falsey was speaking to. It should read, for purposes of the section and charter Article 13, not Section 13. So do you want me to amend the amendment, or would you prefer that I let this one go and then offer a subsequent amendment?
Ms. Gray Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Flynn, I'd like to make this as simple as possible. So how about amending the amendment?
Okay.
Thank you.
The amendment that you have authored here or offered here reads delete 13.10. It should be delete section 13.10. And it should be insert Article 13.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn.
Is there a second? Ask unanimous on that. See no objection, Madam Clerk. Let the minutes reflect on this item. That amendment was approved.
Need to vote on it now.
I know. Here.
Ms. Dombrowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. After my complete frustration for a moment, I want to thank you for your comments because you helped hone me into where I was trying to go, but I didn't know I wanted to go. And I think the big difference for me came down to the end of the fiscal year versus the close of the fiscal year because I was so focused on trying to read this amendment. I do help it. I still stand by what I said. I don't know that this really clarifies much. I know everybody else thinks it does, but I appreciate your explanation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Since it was my motion, Mr. Train, can you call the vote?
Okay. Madam Clerk, please set the vote up. Let's do it.
This is Ms. Gray Jackson's amended.
Yes. Amended document. Please vote.
Is this on there?
As amended.
As amended.
That was approved by the body.
We are now at the main motion, AO 2016-91. I don't see anyone in the queue. Please vote. That item was approved. We are now at agenda item number 14E, AO 2016-93, financing a portion of 7 AWW capital improvement wastewater projects and providing for related matters. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
We need a second, please. Thank you. No one in the queue, please vote. That ordinance was approved. We are now at agenda item number 14F, AO 2016-94, financing a portion of 6 AWW capital improvement water projects and providing for related matters. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Thank you. No one in the queue, please vote. That ordinance is approved. We are now at agenda item number 14G.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Flynn.
In the interest of full disclosure, before we take up this item, I wish to disclose that I am the partial owner of 2 liquor licenses in the municipality of Anchorage. One is a full beverage dispensary permit. One is a restaurant license for beer and wine only.
Thank you, Mr. Flynn. Ms. Dombrowski.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't know that was coming.
Me neither.
So, Mr. Flynn.
He's becoming the subject of a lot of discussion.
Mr. Flynn, so we're going to go through, you're making 2 declarations because you own 2 liquor licenses, essentially. Do you have, is your financial or private interest held substantial part of the matter under consideration in your review?
It is not. We do not participate in the program.
Okay, do you think your financial or private interest will vary substantially with the outcome of the official action?
It will not.
Okay, and Mr. Flynn, since you don't participate in these programs, and do you believe that you can put the public interest before any private interest of you or your business?
I do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Mr. Croft?
Simply want to talk on the main motion when it's ready. So
Okay, Mr. Flynn, with that said, the chair rules that you do not have a conflict. Thank you. Mr. Croft?
Do we need to?
Have we moved it?
We have some to discuss.
Okay. Oh,
We need
man.
public hearing open before we can discuss.
Gosh. Okay, we are now at agenda item 14G. And in a moment, Mr. Trainee, AO 2016-91, amend Anchorage Municipal Code, Section 1050-035, to eliminate the sunset of the bar safety hour permit program on August 31st, 2016, to make the program long-term. We also have before us agenda item number 14G1, AO 2016-96S. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Thank you, Bill. Welcome. Please state your name, spell your last.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Sylvia. I'm the director of the
Can you
Alaska.
speak into the mic, please? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
My name is Sylvia. I'm the director of the Alaska Hospitality Retailers. And I am here to thank you again for letting this program go through for the last year. And hopefully you can assist us in your consideration and support of this program again. Although this program, has not had a lot of consensus from different people as I get feedback from you guys up there, but it's been working for the industry. The reason why the industry brought this program forth is for the safety, the public safety of our patrons, our customers. We had very hard winter months, and we have seen how people dress inappropriately in the winter, waiting outside for taxis or private rides home. In the meantime, they are being out there, and there's predators that, can actually take advantage of these people that are sitting out there waiting for their vehicle or safe ride home. There is right now 5 bars who are participating in the permit program, which is by the municipality of Anchorage. There is 177 restaurant designations that are allowed by population to the State of Alaska Alcoholic Beverage Control Board. There's 148 restaurant designations who are now being utilized in Anchorage, meaning that anyone who has a restaurant designation permit can utilize the program. The program consists of 1 hour after closing, no service, no entertainment, lights are up. That gives time for people up to an hour to get a safe ride home. With that being said, I really will appreciate if you take this into consideration and vote for this program. And I really don't think there is any negativity coming out of it. There's no harm. If anything, we want to be proactive with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? There's no one in the queue, dear. Anyone else wish to be heard? Welcome.
My name is Kirsten Miles, M-Y-L-E-S. I'm the director of Cook Inlet Char, and I did submit my comments in writing, but I did want to take the time to thank you for this opportunity. We do believe the program, despite its limited participation, anytime there's an opportunity to promote responsible service and public safety is in the best interest of the residents of Anchorage and the community and the industry. And we would actually like to work with the Assembly to broaden the participation of the safety hour, and would encourage you to vote to extend the program permanently. So, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your letter. Mr. Trainee.
Ma'am, just make an appointment, come talk here. Just come talk to our Public Safety Committee.
Yes, I
We're
certainly
more than
will.
happy to work with you on this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move approval of this version, Madam Chair.
Thank you. There's no one in the queue. Please vote. Are you in the queue? You're not. Would you? No. Okay. No, he's not. That ordinance is approved. We now have before us agenda item number 14H, AO 2016-95, an ordinance, paragraph A, to change the boundary of the interim existing allowed use area on the interim existing allowed use area map and to redefine the deadline for reverting to the underlying I-2 zone. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. There is no one in the queue. Please vote. That ordinance is approved.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Flynn.
per your previous ruling, I'm going to say good night.
Good night, Mr. Flynn. Have a great evening.
You've done enough damage.
Can you start my car for me? We are now at agenda item number 14I, AR 2016-217, a resolution approving a marijuana license and special land use permit for a marijuana cultivation facility with license number M10310, doing business as Danish Gardens LLC. Public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Hearing and seeing none, public hearing is now closed. What is the wish of the body? Mr. Trainee.
Madam Chairman, is the applicant here?
Yes.
Come on forward, sir. Since this is a new process, is there anything you want to tell us about your license? You don't have to, but...
Well, not in particular, we're trying to, our license as it stands right now, we're applying for a cultivation. We will be applying for multiple licenses for our facility. We just want to make sure we do what you guys want us to do, what the city wants to do, and try to make the industry safe and responsible.
But today we're only dealing with the cultivation license. I want to separate the licenses.
Yes, sir.
Tonight's just cultivation.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. I've got no questions for you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ms. Temboski.
I'll second it just so we can get to business here. I do have a question. First, my comment to the applicant, I liked how you laid out your application, especially breaking out the security, the odor, all the basic concerns we have. I think you addressed them all well, and I think your security, the way you've addressed it, is probably the best we've seen so far. So I just want to say that to you. I was a little confused when I was reading your packet, simply because in the diagrams, there's only going to be one building on this parcel, right?
There's actually two buildings on the property.
Okay, so my confusion came, and that's where I was hoping you were going to be here. My confusion came in the beginning of the application. I think it was page 11 of 219, if assembly members are looking. When I'm looking at the, it's this page right here. It's the design, the layout of the building.
Okay.
Okay. So my confusion came on the second floor in the designation plan. I noticed a consumption room. What's that?
Well, if the city allows for a public consumption area, that's designed basically for tourists. That when tourists come into town off of cruise ships or buses, that they're able to purchase the marijuana but have nowhere to legally use it. So they would
But
probably
that would have nothing to do with a cultivation license that you're looking to get this time. That's only if you
No,
come
ma'am.
back.
And like Mr. Trainee said, he wanted to keep them separated, and I apologize. When we first started this whole process, we initiated all of our licenses under one facility, and we turned in our initial plan that had all of the licenses considered in one.
Yeah, that's okay. I wanted to make sure because I was seeing, building A, building B, and then I was trying to go back to find the consumption room under the secondary plans that were back here, and it was not there. So I wanted just clarification what that was about. So effectively, if you come back with a retail, we'll deal with that then.
Yes,
but I just want to make sure I was understanding what I was reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dombrowski. Thank you, sir. Mr. Weddleton, do you have a question for this gentleman?
No. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Nobody has a question for you. Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you. I'd like to make a couple motions. First one would be Amendment 1, which you've just been handed.
Mr. Weddleton,
Second.
before you make those motions, could you tell us what the recommendation was from the committee?
The Community and Economic Development Committee recommended to forward this with the conditions that were listed and also this condition, Amendment 1.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Please continue.
Okay, this is the regarding signs being on the building that we've applied to all of the previous cases. This maintains that standard.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson, do you have a comment on the proposed amendment or on the?
No, I was going to talk about the funding.
Okay. Well, why don't we vote on the proposed amendment before I call on you? The amendment before us is Amendment Number 1, brought forward by Assembly Members Weddleton, Trainee, Dombrowski, and Mr. Peterson. And Mr. Croft, do you have a comment on the amendment before we vote?
Yeah, just a quick question. So does this
Thank you.
amend the land use permit, the license, or both?
Mr. Weddleton?
It's just for the land use permit.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, please vote on Mr. Weddleton and others' amendment. That amendment was approved. Thank you, thank you. Okay, that amendment was approved. Okay, in the queue, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to say that this is a very detailed application, well over 200 pages. I think they've dotted all the i's and crossed all the t's. I think the Planning Department and the Clerk's Department has done an excellent job of making sure that all the requirements have been met. And I think they've set a high bar to try for the next applicant to have an equal detailed application as this one is, and so I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Croft? Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Weddleton?
I'd like to make a second amendment, and that is to remove two of the conditions. So on page 2, line 30 through 37, delete conditions 6 and 7, and then renumber the following 3.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Is there a second? Mr. Trainee?
Why?
Thank you. That was on the advice of staff when they looked at it, regards to parking and so on, and looking at the layout, they found that those are not issues for the snow storage and the parking.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Weddleton, did you want to make another comment?
No.
Okay, thank you. There's no one in the queue. Please vote on Mr. Weddleton's proposed amendment. That amendment is approved. We now have before us the main motion, AR 2016-217, and there's no one in the queue. Please vote. That ordinance is approved. We are now at the end of the agenda. There is no special orders or unfinished stuff. So we're now at audience participation. Anyone wish to be heard? Welcome, sir. Please state your name, spell your last.
I'm Steve Heimel, H-E-I-M-E-L, and I'm just here to raise a concern that came up that I haven't even looked into yet, but I think the Assembly should be aware of it. So, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly, I'm rising for the cause of food security and social coherence in my neighborhood of Spenard. On Saturday, my wife and I were disappointed to see a substantial reduction in the number of vendors at the Spenard Farmers Market. Upon inquiry, we discovered that the Municipal Health Department had visited the market the prior week and told many vendors they needed more expensive licenses to continue their practices. Our kombucha vendor was afraid to fill our growler. Nobody had free samples. Nearly every value-added practice was discontinued. Many chose just not to show up the next week. I don't know what's going on, but I've heard first that there's a state law that was passed to allow this food sovereignty to these markets, and that the municipality is taking a primacy issue and trying to be more strict than the state. I'm not sure that's necessary. I'm also told that a lot of these regulations are subject to interpretation, and apparently a draconian interpretation was made the case last week. I'm concerned that perhaps there's a matter of an issue of selective enforcement, and I question whether there was a complaint. If there was a complaint, I think the proper procedure is for whoever takes the complaint in the health department to say they will refer it to their supervisor because it's very concerning, and the supervisor can then deal with it properly. Maybe we were just dealing with inexperienced employee. The municipal health department would appear, however, to be acting in a way that is detrimental to my family's health. We want a healthy diet. We grow a lot of our own food. We eat wild game, fish, and berries. We have a robust compost. We like our vegetables fresh. We seek probiotics, and we don't drink soda pop. We're willing to pay a premium for these healthy choices, and we value our farmers market in our neighborhood. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, this is just more a comment than a question. I am on the board of the Muldoon Farmers Market, and we have actually also been visited by the health department 3 times this summer, and they have closed down 1 or 2 booths, but then those booths have reopened after getting these other licenses or dealing with issues. So I think we've noticed it as well, that they seem much more aggressive this summer than last, but hopefully we can get it resolved because, like you, we prefer to eat food from our farmers market. So but thank you for bringing this up. And again, we've always found, for those in the administration, we've always found that the inspectors are very polite and seem very diligent. And we don't think there's an issue with selective enforcement in terms of one market over the other or anything like that, but they do seem to be much more aggressive this summer. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Heimel, for raising this issue. What I'll do, Melinda Freeman, who's the head of the Department of Health for the municipality, reports regularly to the Public Safety Committee. I'll ask her to report to us at our next meeting as to what efforts are being made or what may be driving what you're seeing, so we can get a report from her on that and make sure that there is nothing, arbitrary or selective about what they're doing.
You're going to call. Thank you, Mr. Evans. There's no one else in the queue. Thank you, sir, for coming this evening. Anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone at all? Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn, Madam Chair.
Meeting's adjourned.